Podcast is brought to you by the Patterns of Possibility, where we help people make more meaningful relationships in both their personal and professional life. Hi, I'm Coach Lee Hopkins. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I want to welcome you to the Engaged Employee Podcast. Our mission is to emphasize the relationship between the employee and the workplace with the goal of enhancing engagement levels to create a more productive and satisfying work environment. While many organizations strive to create a more engaging atmosphere, they often miss the mark by forcing connection with big team building events like axe throwing or escape rooms. Those activities only leave employees with a short-lived sense of belonging. Organizations may also try smaller and more suffocating events like happy hours or group birthday celebrations that their employees feel obligated to attend. As a social connections and business culture coach, I've found that to create a stable, engaged, and productive workforce, there needs to be a shift in focus from mandatory fun and manufactured connection towards building trust and authentic conversation. Join me and a guest as we dive into social wellness strategies for the individual employee, techniques for developing interpersonal relationships with coworkers, and even some approaches for leaders to enrich the overall organizational culture. The Engaged Employee Podcast starts now. Hi, my name is Coach Lee, and welcome to the Engaged Employee Podcast. Today, my guest is Fabian. Isis is a consultant, speaker, and coach who has an extensive background in researching global workplace culture. Their work enables them to diagnose cultural issues that are systemically marginalizing certain groups and voices. They also support historically marginalized groups through coaching and workshops, validating and demystifying their experiences of the unspoken realities of corporate culture. And at the same time, they educate advanced population or vantaged populations on the harm of inauthentic allyship and how some of those same advantaged populations can create space for each to reach their full potential. Our conversation today will be focused on wellness for the company at large. Isis, welcome to the Engaged Employee Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Coach Lee. It's great to be here with you.
Wonderful. It's so great to meet you too. When I first met you, I was really impressed by the way you talked about culture because you had said something about whiteness to me. And I was like, what? You said this to me? And you're like, yes, I know that it exists. And I find that that is absolutely fascinating and is difficult for a lot of people to say. So I'd be curious to know, how are you demystifying the workplace? How did you get into this?
Oh my gosh. Start with how I get into it. Then I want to talk about the whiteness piece, briefly. I started out, I have my educational background's in psychology and economics, so I ended up working almost by accident in a diversity and inclusion research think tank. And I'm also neurodivergent. And so I spent my whole life not really knowing that for most of my life and kind of feeling like I was on the outside looking in on a lot of social dynamics, especially workplace culture, especially once I was in a nonprofit think tank full of other white women who were, so there was a lot of like passive aggression and coded language and like all of these unspoken rules that I really struggled with. And so I was dealing with that while at the same time I was doing research that involved me going out and facilitating focus groups, of conducting interviews on the phone with people all around the globe about their experiences at different intersections of identity with corporate culture, mostly these big kind of Fortune 500 companies. And so with my kind of pattern recognition skills that came with my neurodivergence and then my own experience of a certain kind of marginalization, then you tack on spending my early childhood in a predominantly Black neighborhood and having like a more than average level of awareness of like what whiteness kind of entailed in my life, I started piecing together this mosaic of like, oh my gosh, like I'm seeing the Matrix, right? I was like, it's all one thing. And whiteness does play such a huge role. And that's really hard for people who look like me to hear and understand what that means. Sometimes I describe it as like, a fish swimming in a fish bowl, right? it's just breathing water. You have someone else,
Yeah.
dog comes up to you and is like, oh, you're breathing water. Like, this is hard. You're like, what water? Right? Like, that is kind of the
Hmm.
experience of it. So I think I can demystify it a bit. Hearing it from someone who looks like me is a little less, they feel less threatened, less intimidated when we just kind of like talk about the facts of corporate culture for what they are, which when you really speak in plain English about it, there's very little that people can disagree with.
Yeah, there was a whole lot that you said there, and I found myself tempted to grab and pull at a couple of things that you shared. So I want to go back a little bit to the neurodivergent piece and how that is helping you put together the pieces. Essentially, I heard you say something is helping you put together those pieces, but also your awareness about these things is something that might be a little to your detriment in this corporate workplaces and being, or not, maybe not your awareness of it, but being willing to speak about it too. Because I had been in the workplace and I felt like you just said everything that I experienced. The code switching, the coded language. I'm not sure what people are saying or why they're saying or how they're saying it. Those things. And as a neurodivergent person, you being in the workspace, having this experience, there's an exclusion for you just because of that piece. But also, I hear you saying it's a bit of a superpower too.
Yeah, from a research standpoint, definitely a superpower because I was just like taking in and integrating and synthesizing such vast quantities of information. Just, doing so many qualitative interviews, I was just seeing patterns and connections between stories I was hearing from different people, even people who had virtually no identities in common with one another. That really started to form this picture for me. But then the disadvantage, I mean, I remember being as young as, elementary school, middle school, someone would be trying to bully me. I remember one of my best friends, it was her birthday party. And another friend was planning it for her, like as a surprise party. And that girl didn't invite me to, what this girl was one of my best friends to her birthday party. And so I went up to her at school and I was like, oh, like you forgot to invite me to this, or I wasn't invited to this. Like what happened? And she was like, oh, like, I guess I forgot. And then I was like, wow, like that's crazy that you could like forget to invite one of her best friends. Like that's so surprising and weird, and didn't even, it went over my head that she wasn't immediately apologizing or being like, oh, of course you were invited or anything, It was just she said she forgot. I thought she forgot. That was just like a shocking, surprise to me. But I would just take everything that everyone said at face value, which honestly protected my self-worth to some extent, especially, in school you have your interpersonal relationships, but your work is your work. You're doing it by yourself for the most part. You're turning in your essays. You're getting an A plus. So I was an excellent student. I got the best SAT score in my grade. But then when I got into the workforce, out of college, and suddenly the quality of your work, perceptions of the quality of your work is all interdependent on these social dynamics and whether or not you're liked and whether or not you're seen as trustworthy. There was all these other layers that came in that definitely put me at a disadvantage. And you add in being a white woman, where we kind of invented this language of passive aggressive and encoded language. So even when I would say something in plain words, right, like I can't believe you forgot to invite one of her best friends, that's seen as saying something else. That's seen as saying I'm on to you, and we're in a conflict now, and I'm not buying it, But I so often I would be saying one thing in plain English, and a completely different interpretation would be made.
Oh man, and that has to be frustrating. I was behind the scenes just chuckling a little bit. Oh, she forgot. Oh, and you were like, oh, that's weird how you would do that. But to the coded, the other people who are experienced with that culture or that understanding, they may understand like what's between the lines, reading between the lines. You just took it at face value. And so when you move from this place of being in the school to the workplace, where now you have to create these social dynamics and you have to connect with people, and that's going to be very integral to you actually excelling at the workplace. Some of the challenges that you've experienced, I'd love to hear a little bit about those challenges and about how you help companies today face those challenges.
Yeah. So I was very quickly, because I was in a nonprofit research environment, every skill that I had would be taken up, right? It's like, oh, come do this. Oh, you're in charge of this now. And so I was doing so much work and so much that formed the kind of backbone of the, production of this organization. Um, that came with the double-edged sword of I was told I was intimidating, these kinds of things. And also like I was, out to get people who were senior to me, especially one manager I had in particular who I had pretty much the whole time I was there. We could not have been more different. We could not have been worse, more incapable of seeing eye to eye. And it took me a while to figure out that she thought I was very much trying to subvert her, had some ulterior motive against her. Cause I would just point out things that didn't make sense. I'd be like, well, why would we do it that way when we should be doing it this way? Or why are we doing this? We saw what happened last year when we tried that and it totally fell apart. We missed all our deadlines. I would just say those things and just point those things out. And it took me a while to finally learn that doing that was seen as attacking, the person who was hierarchically superior to me in the room.
But you were just being a good employee, right? You were
Yeah.
trying to keep the company in line with its goals. This is what I can't help but to smile at these experiences, because you're taking it with such a good heart, and you're taking it and you're learning from that to share with other people. So I definitely understand. I'm going to go back out of the space now, and I'm going to allow you to finish. Please continue telling us your story, because it's really brilliant.
I'm glad you can relate. I think that's what I find, and what I find the most reward in the work I do is kind of sharing these stories and how many people do find validation, and see commonality in their own experiences. Why I really like working with as a group coach and just an employee resource group leader and that kind of function with people from historically excluded and marginalized groups, because I can come in and I can explain some of what they're experiencing and I can demystify it for them, because that same pattern-based thinking is what enabled me to somewhat quickly, over the early part of my career, piece together, oh, okay, so this is what's going on. So this is why when I do this, it's perceived that way, et cetera, right? So now, flash forward, a decade into this kind of research and consulting based work on workplace culture, I feel like I have a very clear idea of a lot of the misalignment and miscommunication that happens between senior leadership and junior most people. Because keep in mind, I have my lived experience working in organizations, but also the research across all of these companies, such a diversity of industries, thousands of people whose stories I heard either through virtual online focus groups or in-person ones or on the phone. And so I build on that, massive repository of qualitative and quantitative data, because there's a lot of nationally representative quantitative data in that research as well, to inform, organizations and leaders about what's really often going on that they're misinterpreting from people in their workforce, especially women, especially people from racialized groups, neurodivergent people with disabilities, Gen Z. Gen Z's in here now. They're more neurodivergent than ever. They're more queer than ever. And there was just a lot of misinterpretation and miscommunication happening from the bottom to the top of the organization.
Yeah, I definitely understand and can imagine that. I love how you talk about, your lived experience, but you're also your research experience, your research around it. I'd be curious to know who hires you. What kind of companies say, "Hey, I can use your help because there's something wrong here. I don't know exactly what it is," but they look for you particularly?
Mostly it's smaller companies, nonprofits, these smaller organizations that have a younger workforce, or they're more mission driven. They tend to be more tapped into, concepts like decolonization and things like that. And they want support. Like they realize, they're in that zone of conscious incompetence. They're like, there's a gap here. We need help with this, with all the backlash to DEI. And there is the whole DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, industrial complex. That I try to really stay separate from, because it causes its own type of harm, and there's no accountability, and there's tons of money wasted in that space. So it can be hard. Organizations that aren't really clear-eyed on what their problems are might not pursue any kind of support in that area. But I would say it's these smaller organizations that are mission-driven, that are a little further ahead in their journey, and then also ones where they're having these acute problems. They have people constantly misgendering, the non-binary people on staff. They have, quiet quitting, return to office, hybrid problems just culturally with, staff alignment, or neurodiversity, right? They have all these people at a higher rate than ever coming and disclosing that they're neurodivergent and saying, I have ADHD, I have autism, I need this accommodation, I need that accommodation. And they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to support managers. There's still a huge normalization of discrimination and stigma against people who have any of these, diagnoses. And so there's a tremendous risk of, discrimination lawsuits. So sometimes it's, an employment lawyer being like, hey, can you come help my client with this problem that they're having? Because they really need whatever behavior is happening or whatever manager is not getting it to like be resolved as quickly as possible. And so that's how I might come in to do workshops, or I might come in to coach a specific individual or coach a group of people, be a resource for your women, your population of women. If you're in this like little tech niche tech company and you have so few women and there's such a rare talent pool and you're worried about losing them, I might come in and be that career coach, career advancement kind of resource for them, or for your neurodivergent population, or to be a coach one-on-one for managers that are struggling, or leaders that are really struggling to connect the dots on why they need to play this role in an organizational culture that is psychologically safe, where every person has an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. It's not about, oh, let me diversify my team. Is one of the biggest misconceptions I see, and what diversity and inclusion has really pushed that confuses people, is they're trying to reverse engineer an inclusive environment by saying, oh, I'll just get a bunch of Black people in here and then I'll fix it. Like, no, you're bringing them into like a freaking shark pool. Like they're not gonna stay. They're not gonna succeed. They're gonna be still working twice as hard to get half as much, if not worse than that. So
Absolutely.
you have to do the culture. Who's on your team now? Look at where you're at now. What are your engagement scores now? What are your 360s on your managers now? If you already have managers that are failing to hear their staff, you have people staying less than a year on average at your organization, why do you think bringing in people who are a different, race or ethnicity or neurotype is going to go any better than the one try to reverse it to be like, no, this is a leadership competency. This is a managerial competency for sustained, adaptive, expansive culture shifting, right? To create a dynamic culture that expands with everyone that comes into it. Not an inclusive culture, honestly, where it's like a homogenous core that, includes people into it, because you're still putting power at the center and you're still de-emphasizing the things that make people different and unique and emphasizing the things that make them the same. So that's not solving any problems. So yeah, that's kind of like the focus I have to shift away from when it comes to the diversity aspect.
Wow, that was so powerful. I mean, I heard you say a whole lot of things about how relationships in our workplace are really, focused on what our leadership is doing. Essentially, if you're not doing something already, why are you going to bring somebody who doesn't understand your culture? If people are already jumping ship trying to get away from your culture, why do you think somebody else is going to enjoy being in that space just because you think that maybe they have a different thought process or different experiences? I don't know what it is, but I really like that you brought that up. And I know we're running out of time. I'm dying to ask you this question though, so I'm going to ask you that and have us go just a little longer. But I'm curious about, this is a big change. This is a big change for you to come into in a space. And I know they invite you in there. But with anything, I'm a coach too. And with anything, when you tell someone, hey, you might be the problem, nobody likes that. They don't like that. People don't really like that. It's hard for them to take it. They want to resist it. They want to point at other things initially. And I'd be curious to know, how do you deal with that? Or maybe a better question would be, do many people respond to you in that way? They're like, I know we invited you to come here, Isis, to help us understand what's going on in our culture, but never mind. What do you do in that case?
Well, and sometimes, the way the project is set up, it is hard to avoid that kind of reactive thing, especially when it's a very small company and you're unearthing things about their culture that are really kind of undeniable. And they tend to want to throw the more junior people under the bus and say they don't know what they're talking about. These are often the younger people that you're getting really clear insights from. So that does happen sometimes. But on the whole, I take an approach that is very, I don't come in as like, I am the authority and I know everything and I do everything the right way. I actually tell lots of stories about the mistakes that I've made and the thought processes that I've had. And, I tell one story often about being in a like diversity caucus type thing. It was this like fishbowl exercise where essentially I got called out for saying something really white. At the time I didn't understand it. And also the person who was paraphrasing what I said, like paraphrased it wrong. And I was like, oh my God, that's not what I asked. And now I'm being lambasted. I'm the scapegoat of this whole group. And it took me 2 years to be able to actually reflect back on that moment and understand what the woman sitting next to me was saying. And she was totally right. She was saying, why do white people keep asking us how to solve their racism? They're the ones who have it. We're dealing with the consequences of it. We deal with the symptoms of it, but it's y'all's problem. Why do you keep asking us, to explain it to you? And I realized that after it took 2 years for her point to sink in and realize that she was talking to me, and that was a valid, thing to direct at me, despite however I had phrased my question. I said, I'm never again am I going to take 2 years to learn something, like that. When I have an opportunity to learn from someone, it's never going to take that long again. I need to set my ego aside. I need to have that humility. And so I tell stories like that in detail when I do these things, because I'm like, I'm on this journey as well. I'm here to support you in starting it. I'm not here to like come and yell at you or condescend to you. That's again a big problem with the DEI industrial complex is there's a lot of condescending and talking down and vilifying. That's the old operating system. That's you're still acting according to an operating system of competition and individualism and hierarchy, and someone's better and someone's worse. I'm trying to throw out that whole operating system to get to one where we're all equally worthy and we're all equally valid and we all make mistakes and we all have and deserve psychological safety. And so I have to role model that in how I show up. And so that does tend to help. And when it's a coaching situation, I don't ask. I'm like, you're really messing this up. You keep getting reported to HR. Don't you realize blah, 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 just stop yelling at women or whatever it is, right? I'm like, so what's going on? And I get this whole story and then I start digging in on, oh, so what's that about? Oh, you're saying you're angry about all these different things, but what is underneath the anger? And then it's loneliness and it's, it's isolation and it's fear and it's all this other stuff. And so then I'm like, I come in, I'm your partner to figure this stuff out. And so that you have a successful position at work and you have a successful career. I'm not here to come like yell at you, I'm here to support you. So
absolutely,
let's take that approach.
I love that. I mean, because you talked about your lived experiences, you've made mistakes, I've made mistakes, and we talk about it as if many people may talk about it as if they've never made a mistake or they've learned from it instantly, and you should learn from it instantly too, bring all that shame and judgment into the place. But I hear you saying, no way, I'm a human too, and these are my experiences, and this is how I'm growing, and you can learn from what I'm doing. We can all learn together, learn to grow together. Isis, that is absolutely amazing. Who wouldn't want you to come and help them solve these problems? And we're always working together. So tell my audience how they can find you.
You can find me at isisfabian.com. Please feel free to book a free intro call just to chat through whatever's going on for you or at your organization. I also have a neurodiversity tab there. If you are a neurodivergent professional, please go there for some free resources and office hours and things so I can help support you in your career. And just feel free to reach out to me. I love engaging with people on TikTok. You've seen it come up at the bottom at Isis_Fabian on TikTok, and engaging with the audience there on a lot of these kind of big ideas. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Even if there's nothing you think we can work on together, or there's, you're not sure what you want to talk about. If there's something, energetically that's resonating that you want to work through or just, chat about, please don't hesitate to reach out, because these conversations give me life.
Absolutely. And also you can find her on LinkedIn. I'm going to leave all this stuff in the chat or the show notes as well. I'm going to leave all the stuff in the show notes so you'll be able to find them. I think I said her, but them is the
all pronouns.
All pronouns. So I will not make a mistake there. Thank you so much, Isis, for joining us. We definitely want to have you again to have more engaging conversation. Thank you again. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you, Coach Lee. Bye.
And there you have it, another insightful episode of the Engaged Employee Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the deep dive into the world of employee engagement, leadership, and workplace dynamics. The Engaged Employee Podcast is brought to you by the Patterns of Possibility, where we help people make more meaningful relationships in both their personal and professional life. Before we wrap up, we want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our incredible guests and, of course, our loyal listeners. Your support keeps us motivated to bring you valuable content each week. If you found today's discussion thought-provoking and want to learn more about how we can help you or your organization make more meaningful relationships, go to patternsofpossibility.com and book a friendly conversation with me. Or you can email me your questions at patternsofpossibility@gmail.com. Stay connected with us and engage with fellow listeners by following the Patterns of Possibility on LinkedIn. You can also catch us on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell to stay in the loop. And if you prefer the audio version, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your support means the world to us, and by subscribing, you'll never miss an episode. Thank you for being a part of our journey to create workplaces where passion meets productivity. Until next time, I'm Coach Lee. Stay engaged, stay inspired.